Welcome, everyone. It is really a pleasure to have all of you here. Um, and we're just thrilled to be having this conversation today about our work in Nigeria. And really thrilled to welcome our featured guest, Dr. Fatima Akilu, who is the executive director of one of our partner organizations, the Neem Foundation. My name is Jennifer Hall-Witt, and I am Karuna Center's interim executive director. And I just want to let you know that we are recording this event today so that we'll be able to share it with those who can't make it. So many of you may know that the word Karuna in our name is a Sanskrit word, and it refers to compassion in action. Since Karuna Center was founded in 1994, we have really strived to live out this fundamental value, not only by doing what we can to put compassion into action, but also by supporting people in conflict-afflicted communities all around the world to cultivate peace by using the power of dialogue to build understanding and trust amongst those in conflict, and then to empower them to collaborate in joint action to address their common challenges. So over the past 30 years, Karuna Center's worked in more than 30 countries to help build peace. We always work with local partners, and we always adapt our work to the local context. And for the past 6 years, we have been collaborating with 4 partner organizations in Nigeria: the Neem Foundation, Hope for the Village Child, Voluntary Aid Initiative, and Elohim Development Foundation. And together, we have developed and refined a really effective model for preventing violence and for reweaving the social fabric in communities that have been affected by violent conflict. And we now call this model Peace by Us. We're about to launch a website. We have a documentary on the model, as well as something like a 200-page training manual, so that communities that are interested in implementing this model on their own will have access to this toolkit. So I'm going to start with some introductions, and then we're going to hear from Dr. Akilu from the Neem Foundation, who's going to talk about some of the challenges that Nigeria is facing today, as well as areas of resilience and hope. And then my colleague, Asatu Berry, and I will give you a little bit of an overview of our work in Nigeria. This is going to include a short film clip from our documentary that features one of our peace ambassadors. And it's a very moving clip. I know you'll really enjoy it. And then we'll go back to Dr. Akilu, who's going to talk a little bit about the impact of some of this work. I'll say a tiny bit about how we're bringing some of these lessons home for work in communities in the United States. And then we're going to open the floor for questions and answers and just general conversation. So before I start with introductions, I just want to thank those of you who donated to our recent emergency fundraising campaign, which was launched to help sustain this work while there was a funding pause from our funder. I just want to say this campaign was hugely successful. We raised what we needed to get the project started again after a brief pause while we were waiting for payments. And I'm very, very pleased to say that the money finally arrived, and it's been a huge relief for us, but we're super, super grateful for those of you who contributed. And we're now going to be able to use those funds in a second way to support some of the costs for travel and accommodations that are really essential for this project, but that are not being currently covered by our funder. So just really just a heartfelt thank you to all of you who have supported this work. So let me start by introducing Dr. Fatima Akilu. Dr. Akilu is a psychologist, author, former government official, and education advocate. She's the executive director of the Neem Foundation in Abuja, Nigeria. She is a former director of behavioral analysis and strategic communication at the Office of the National Security Advisor in Nigeria. So she really designed and implemented Nigeria's National Countering Violent Extremism program. This is a multidisciplinary strategy that engaged ex-Boko Haram members, youth, and other vulnerable groups in rehabilitation and positive alternatives to violent extremism, and it's been hugely successful. At Neem Foundation, Dr. Akilu has pioneered projects spanning education, peace building, and psychology, including Neem's flagship Counseling on Wheels program that has provided services to over 23 1,000 survivors in 50+ communities in conflict-impacted areas. Dr. Akilu has also authored over 17 children's books and leads a campaign to encourage Nigerian children to read 100 books each year. She's also a visiting senior research fellow at the African Leadership Center at King's College London. And it's really been our great honor to partner with Neem Foundation over the past 6 years and to always, I can say this for myself personally, to feel so welcomed by Dr. Akilu and Neem staff whenever we come to Abuja. I would also like to introduce our second speaker for today's program, which is Asatu Berry. Asatu joined our staff as Senior Program Manager in May, and she brings 18 years of experience in developing, implementing, and evaluating community-driven programs in peace building, democracy, human rights, and governance. Prior to joining us at Karuna Center, Asatu was a practice area director at Equal Access International, and before that, she was the program director at the National Democratic Institute. And she brings particular experience in West Africa, including work in Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Niger, Guinea, Mali, Liberia, and Senegal. And we're so pleased to have her on our staff. I'll just say hello. I know we have one of our partners here. I think I saw, maybe she fell off. I think I saw Sister Rita Schwarzenberger, who is the executive director at one of our partner organizations, Hope for the Village Child. And I can see that we have a few other program staff in Nigeria. So I just want to say welcome to all. We're so glad to have you here. So Laura, if you want to quickly just pull up the agenda. There we go. Okay, so Dr. Akilu is going to say a little bit about the situation in Nigeria today. As I said, we'll give you a little bit of an overview of our work of the Peace Bias model and our work in Nigeria, including a little film clip. We'll talk about impact, bring in lessons home, and then Q&A. So Dr. Akilu, I'm going to turn it over to you now to give us a little bit of an introduction to the context.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your kind introduction. Honestly, it's such a pleasure to be talking to you today about the work that we've been doing with Karuna for the last 6 years, and also to be talking to you about the context that we find ourselves combating here in Nigeria. It's an interesting time to be talking about conflict because it seems that there's conflict all over the world. But I think for the purposes of today's discussion, we will confine it to what's going on in Nigeria. As a lot of you would know, we really have multiple challenges, multiple different types of conflict. Nigeria has been grappling with an ideologically driven conflict for almost 20 years now. So this was driven by Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa branch, which is a branch of IS. While for a long time, probably about 15 years or so, this conflict has been mostly confined to the northeastern region of Nigeria. It has now spread to the middle belt of Nigeria and to the northwest. This has implications for the work that we do, which I will also explain and touch upon. So what has happened in Nigeria is that this ideologically driven conflict has really engaged government for more than a decade and a half, really draining our resources. Multiple lives have been lost. Women and children kidnapped, education truncated for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of young people, especially girls. We have in excess of 2 million people who are internally displaced within Nigeria, and another number, almost 2 million, that are refugees in neighboring states. While that has been going on, we have another flank that's opened up in the northwest, which is where the work that we do with Karuna sits. So in the northwest of Nigeria, we have a different kind of conflict, even though we still have terrorist groups or designated terrorist groups like Islamic State West Africa Province, Ansaru, and the like. But in addition, we have a lot of bandit groups So these bandit groups have been labeled mostly Fulani herdsmen. And they have been operating probably with impunity for about the last 12 years, again, ransacking communities, raping women, kidnapping both men, women, and children, and really almost bringing the economic activities in that region to a halt. In the middle belt of Nigeria, we have had long-standing communal rivalries. We've had some terrorist incidents, but we've also had long-standing farmer-herder conflicts. So while this was mostly known in the Middle Belt, this has now spread to the northwest of Nigeria. And what are these farmer-herder conflicts? So I think in Nigeria, we have a tradition of the Fulani ethnic group who have long, for centuries, who have been herders, and they have really been at liberty to roam across the country with their herd, looking for grazing lands as the season changes, and also in search of water. And these herders are really interconnected across the whole continent. So they're not just confined to Nigeria, but they go and come, and they are all linked by marriage and tribal affiliations. What has happened is that the population has increased exponentially, and the land that they used to graze on is no longer available. And a lot of these grazing routes are now farmlands. So that has put them into conflict with farmers. And this conflict has resulted in, again, thousands and thousands of deaths. But as the government has tried to address, firstly, the conflict through outreach to herders, and then through outreach to farmers, it's been complicated by banditry. And bandits that operate in that area have now really taken siege to the agricultural industry of the country. So what that means is that they have prevented people from farming, which has caused a food crisis with massive food inflation. And or they charge people taxes to be able to farm farmlands that they own. But the most important thing that we've had to deal with is actually the clashes between the farmers and the herders. And there have been many attempts at intervention by statutory bodies. Nigeria is a federated state, so we have a federal level, we have state and local government. So there have been attempts at all levels with varying degrees of success. At the federal level, more recently, there's a large national livestock plan. There's actually a livestock ministry that came into existence just in the past year. And within that livestock ministry, there's also a peace plan that includes a lot of elements of some of the work that we're doing with Karuna, which you will hear about in more detail. This also includes early warning. In addition, there are other agencies of government, for example, the Institute of Peace and Conflict Resolution, that are custodians of a national early warning system. The idea is that if we can respond early enough before conflicts escalate, we have a better chance of solving them. These are some of the interventions in that. So it's working also through an entity called Osprey, which sits within the Vice President's office. At the regional level, there's also been some interventions by the African Union, and ECOWAS has intervened. And you might say, well, with so many interventions, why are we still doing this program? Why are we still talking about farmer-herder conflict? I think the problem has become quite intractable because, in my opinion, a lot of these interventions have been addressed from a top-down approach and not a community-driven approach. So While these frameworks are good, the legislation is excellent. A lot of the policies, including the idea of ranching, so herders don't have to travel. But I think that because we haven't made enough effort to address it at a community level, to actually hear what people want, what is the historic antecedents of these problems, what are the different alliances, and also because we don't have enough of a joined up approach. For example, I think the conflict is ahead of the research and policy. So they're not lined up. So I think the information is always plays a secondary role to government interventions. And for example, we are not addressing it as a truly regional problem. So even if you solve this problem in one place, it will pop up in another place because of the interconnectedness. So this is one of the gaps that we see from the government front. And they are also a lot of other agencies that have attempted to mediate or get involved in this area. Most of them at micro levels and with some success, but it's hard to have a large scale impact because these interventions take time. And a lot of programs such as ours, funders often fund for very short or limited time periods. But this is work that you do in communities that really take a long time to change. What we're doing is behavioral change with multiple disparate groups with different needs and different priorities, different histories, different religious affiliations and ethnic affiliations. To bring them together takes a tremendous amount of effort, trust building, dedication, and long-term involvement on the ground. So these are some of the things that we see on the ground when we look at the farmer herder issue in Nigeria, and this is the space that we are attempting and have been working in for the last 6 years together with Karuna. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akilu. I hope that gives you all a sense of the very challenging context. But there are many sort of, I would say, places where we really have room for hope that we can make a difference. And part of the reason Dr. Kilo mentioned that, this is behavioral change that takes time, not just at the individual level, but in terms of communities beginning to work together. And I think one of the reasons we've had success is that our previous work was funded for a full 5 years. And by the time we got to about year 3.5, we suddenly saw this real shift where communities were really taking ownership of the work, really realizing that it was up to them, that community security, that they had a really important role and nobody was going to do it for them. We were giving them some tools, but it was really up to them. And so we were able to measure the success of this model because it lasted for 5 years. What we saw was huge change, really significant declines in violence in communities, increased feelings of safety that allowed people who were in these internally displaced camps to come back to their communities, able to start farming or, earning a livelihood again. And, as well as really, for communities that had tensions between, let's say, Muslims and Christians, those sense of collaboration between those two communities had significantly increased. But it did take time, and that is one of the reasons why this model, we know it works, because we are able to test it out for that period of time. Laura, if you want to put up the PowerPoint again, I'll just give you a little bit of a sense of what we're doing, what our approach is, what this Peace by Us model is. So basically, it's a model for early warning, early response. And what I think is special about it, often early warning is happening separate from early response. And oftentimes early warning is happening at a national level or a wider regional level. And there aren't really close connections between early warning and early response. And what we have done is to really implement it at the community level, so that when you get reports of early warning, it's with all of the local knowledge, because it is local volunteers who are really paying attention to what those early warning signs are of violent conflict. And then that same group is then initiating early response through a variety of tools that we've developed. And I think that's one of the other things that's really wonderful about this model is the robust range of early responses that the communities we train have at hand. So I'll try to go quickly here to just give you a little bit of a sense. So we form communities, kind of committees of volunteers in each of the communities where we are working. Currently, we're working in 33 communities across 5 states in the Middle Belt and the Northwest. And we train them in early warning and early response. We train them in dialogue facilitation. We train them as lay counselors for trauma first aid. And some of those committee members are particularly focused on early warning. So they are people who have networks in the community. Maybe they're market women, maybe they're motorcycle drivers who transport people all around the community. And so they know, they can see what's happening in depth. And they are focused on collecting early warning signs of potential violence. We have an app that they can report on. People can call on the telephone. We have WhatsApp groups where they can report. They can report directly to the Community Peace Committee. And this committee is made up of sort of stakeholders and leaders from that community. They might include the local religious leaders, traditional rulers, leaders of local organizations, local farmers and herders, people in women's groups, youth groups, and ordinary citizens. And they are coming together and volunteering their time to do this work. We, in terms of early response, I would say the 2 forms of early response that we've found to be most transformative are dialogue and collaborative problem solving. But we use these community peace committees use a variety of other tools as well. So if something is imminent, they're going to report it to authorities. If there are rumors circulating that are false or fake news, we can use media campaigns to help counter some of those false narratives. We have radio programs that are engaging our region in education about what it looks like to build peace and the success of doing that. Oftentimes, the committees will do advocacy with local government officials, security officials to build those relationships and to involve them in this work. And then, as I said, community sort of centered trauma first aid can be another response. So I thought I would give you just 2 examples of these 2 responses that have been the most transformative. And I want to start with dialogue. It's sort of Karuna's bread and butter. We've been doing, and seeing the transformative effects of dialogue for the 30 years that we've been around. And I'll give you just one example from, that we often see in communities with farmer-herder conflict. So oftentimes herders will, on a particular day, send their very young children out to kind of take the herd out to graze. And when they do that, that can often increase the chances of the herd, migrating into a local farmer's crops. The children just don't quite have, the maturity to be able to manage the herd in the way that is needed. And the animals will, move into farmland and destroy some of the crops. And this is a kind of an existential issue for the farmer because this is their sustenance. This is how they feed their family. And when this happens, sometimes the farmer or other local farmers will, feel like they want to take revenge, and they will, begin to organize to retaliate against any herders in the area, not just the one who, whose animals migrated into the farmer's land. And that's how you can get these sort of retaliatory cycles of violence back and forth. And so in communities where we've been working and there is a community peace committee, what will happen is, that initial, incident happens, but immediately the committee becomes active. They go to both the herder who, committed the problem here, And then they'll also go to the farmer, and they will bring them together in dialogue, assuming that they both seem ready to do that. And the dialogue itself is transformative. They see each other as human beings. And these are communities, farming and herding communities, that often don't have much contact until we begin to bring them together in dialogue, so they don't necessarily know each other. And simply the act of listening to each other, of beginning to understand the perspective of the other side, makes all the difference. And so what you'll often see at the end of one of these dialogues is that the herder will apologize deeply, for what happened when his young son, was with the herd. He will take responsibility for it. He will make some kind of an offering to compensate the farmer. And the farmer himself will often forgive the herder. And then that incident is essentially resolved. And, once a community peace committee gets really established and has been working over a period of time, they begin to see both, the power of dialogue to transform these conflicts. But then as the farming and herding communities begin to develop relationships with each other, begin to be able to collaborate together, then what happens is that they can bring them together at the beginning of each farming season to problem solve together, to think about what are the kinds of conflicts we've had in the past that could lead to violent conflict, and how can we work together to avoid those conflicts, in this given farming season. And what we've seen over a period of years, as I mentioned, violence will decline so much in a community that farmers who had to flee and who've been living in internally displaced camps will be able to come back. They'll be able to now farm, provide food for the region. And we also have many reports from local police and from judges that their work has visibly declined in communities where we're working, because we are resolving so many conflicts through dialogue, and they're not being brought to the police, and they're not being brought to the courts. So that's an example of dialogue and how it can really be transformative as part of the early warning, early response process. And I'll just quickly give an example of collaborative problem solving. This is from a community in Kaduna State, where there was a lot of distrust between Christians and Muslims. They did not feel safe entering each other's neighborhoods. And so the Community Peace Committee brought together a variety of stakeholders from the community. They did a conflict analysis and tried to figure out what was really at the root cause of this breach in relationship between these two groups. And they began to facilitate dialogue, host community meetings that dramatically improved the situation, so much so that now Christians and Muslims in that community, not only are they able to visit each other's homes, but they are very actively supporting each other during their religious celebrations. So that's what we're doing at the community level. And then we are also bringing all of these communities together at the regional level, so they can begin to talk to each other and learn from each other, and begin to develop regional approaches for early warning, early response, so that it's not only the communities that we're directly serving that are helped, but hopefully, and again, we're just sort of starting up this work in the communities now, but hopefully that means that we will be able to have an impact on some of the communities where we're not directly working because of this regional collaboration. And we're connecting these regional networks also to early warning structures at the state level and at the national level. And I'll just mention one other quick thing about our project, which I think is really important, which is the way in which we've built people capacity. And I know I need to finish. Yeah. So I'll just say we took our community dialogue facilitators and the people who were serving on early response committees in our previous work, and we've now trained them to be the trainers. So it is local people who've been doing this work for 5 years who are now the trainers, who have just trained all 33 of our communities. And when this project ends, they will have the capacity then to keep training new communities. So we are leaving this capacity there. This is not outside people coming in. This is really happening from the ground up. And so Asatu, I'll just turn it over to you to give us a little quick overview of some of the kinds of communities where we're working.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'll be talking about the 33 communities and how, we've selected them under the ECOS project. The project operates across 5 states in Northwest and North Central Nigeria, with each community-based organization serving as a regional hub I'll be talking about each of the CBOs and where they're exactly implementing ECOS activities. The general approach for selecting the community was to leverage the capacity built on the previous project that Denise mentioned, protecting our communities, and then expand out from the POC communities to new communities, either in the same local government areas and to communities in nearby local government areas or across state borders. This allows for the creation of 3 regional early warning, early response networks that will continue to impact communities beyond the project. So based off this, ECOS selected 33 communities in the spectrum from like medium to higher risk in terms of their security and the safety of implementing the project. So you will see that in Region 1, it's implemented by Elohim Development Foundation in Benue and Nasarawa states. And in Region 2, it's implemented by Voluntary Aid Initiative in Zamfara and Katsina states. Region 3 is implemented by Hope for the Village Child Foundation in Kaduna State, Kaduna North and South. So I'm going to talk about each region individually. So Region 1 in Benue and Nasarawa, there's some key characteristic with each of the LGs that we work in. Dr. Akilu and Jennifer already mentioned some of the challenges that the communities are affecting, so I'm not going to repeat those. But those communities are mixed, like some semi-urban centers and rural communities, mainly the rural communities. And the prevalent security challenges are like farmer-herder clashes, land disputes, ethnic and political conflicts, youth delinquency, drug abuse, domestic violence. In some other areas like Region 2 in Zamfara and Katsina, the major security challenges in the region include vandalism of public property, mass kidnapping, banditry, farmer-herder clashes, land dispute, ethnic conflict, etc. Region 3 in Kaduna North and South. Kaduna also faces kidnapping, land dispute, farmer-herder conflict, drug abuse, domestic violence, cattle wrestling, political violence, etc. These different types of security challenges in each of the community that we implement ECOS activities vary. Sometimes you would see that in, for example, Benue, through our baseline assessment, we found that farmer-herder conflict is the biggest issue with 55% of the respondents who responded to the baseline survey that identified farmer-herder issues as the biggest issue in the region. We also have like kidnapping at 20%, banditry, armed groups, and drug problems and domestic violence at 8%. That's mainly the issues in the regions, and I'll pass it on to Jennifer.
Great. So we're going to just give you we just want you to hear the voice of one of our implementers. So we have a little video, 5-minute video clip from our documentary. And this is of Adama Hassan, who was trained as a community dialogue facilitator in our previous project and also as a lay counselor offering trauma first aid. And so in this clip, you'll see the first minute or so is just a little bit of introduction to the project and the context, but then you'll hear her talking about her work as a lay counselor. She is now one of our peace ambassadors. She has just helped to train the 11 communities in Kaduna State. She was one of the peace ambassadors doing that training. So Laura, do you want to start the little video clip?
For decades, rural communities across Nigeria have weathered storms of conflict driven by socio-economic crisis, loss of livelihoods, and the impacts of climate change. Hundreds of thousands have been displaced, injured, or lost to communal clashes, mob justice, election-related violence, terrorism, and attacks by armed groups. As insecurity spreads, ethnic and religious groups often find themselves pitted against each other, losing the positive connections they once shared. Acts of revenge, mob justice, or heavy-handed kinetic interventions further fuel this cycle of violence. Every aspect of community life is affected, from farms and markets to schools and homes. Yet, community members have rarely had a platform for sustainable problem solving. The people most deeply impacted by insecurity have often been the last to be consulted. Their insights, experiences, and capacity to lead have been the missing piece. But change is on the horizon. Through determination and collaboration, empowered communities across Benue, Kaduna, and Zamfara states are transforming their own security. They are working in partnership with those they once thought of as enemies, forging a new way forward hand in hand with decision makers and building sustainable peace. For many, confronting their trauma is essential before they can engage in meaningful dialogue and reconciliation. As an early response, those in need of mental health support are guided to trained lay counselors who help them begin the wellness process.
Gaskiya haka ne, an samu attack a kwanakin baya saboda kidnappers ne sun shiga garinmu cikin dare, sun kwashi mutane 61. A cikin mutanen da suka kwashe akwai ƙannin babana guda 3 sai ƙanina guda 1. To bayan da aka tafi da waɗannan mutanen, gaskiya ni kaina na shiga cikin damuwa. To samun training ɗin da na yi na lay counseling, sai na amfani da wannan dama na controlling damuwana, sannan kuma sai na je na yi ƙoƙarin controlling ɗin damuwan waɗanda abin ya shafe su. Na yi nasarar samun abin da nake so, saboda kowa ya fahimce ni, abubuwan da na koya musu sun yi kuma sun samu nasarar haka. Bayan haka, waɗanda suka dawo an saki mutane, amma a ciki an kashe mutane 7. A cikin waɗanda aka kashe akwai ƙanin babana guda 1, sannan kuma sai wanda aka harba mutum 1, shi ma ƙanin babana ne, sai wanda mutum kuma 1 ya dawo, sai ƙanina shi ma guda 1 da ya dawo. Waɗanda suka dawo ɗin nan, na yi ƙoƙarin controlling damuwansu su ma, kuma na samu nasara saboda abubuwan da na koya ma waɗannan wanda ya shafe su, su ma haka na yi ƙoƙarin in koya musu, kuma na samu nasara. Cikin kwana 1-2 sun shiga cikin mutane, suna harka da mutane kamar ma sun manta abin da ya faru da su. Gaskiya na ji daɗin wannan abu. Gaskiya mental health and psychosocial support tana da mahimmanci sosai. Abin da ya sa na ce haka saboda idan an zo magana early warning, early response, idan mutum yana cikin hankalin shi ne zai zauna ya yi dialogue. To idan baka cikin hankalinka, duk waɗannan abubuwan ba zai yiwu ba. Shi yasa na ce mental health and psychosocial support su ne masu ba da kamar taimakon gaggawa. First aid kenan.
This crucial step allows individuals to process their pain, break the cycle of violence, and prepare for dialogue that fosters lasting peace and understanding.
So we're maybe a couple minutes behind schedule, but I'd like to turn it over back again to Dr. Akilu just to talk a little bit of what you and your colleagues have seen in terms of the impact of this work.
Thank you so much. And I will try and keep to time and keep it short. I think the first thing that I'd like to say is that this project is quite unique in many ways because it has 3 layers: international, Karuna; national, Neem; and then we have our 3 great partners who are in the States, including Hope for the Village Child, LOM, and so, and local communities. So I think this is a model that has proven to be really, really impactful. And I think it's, we've also worked in a way that's been very collaborative, and responsibilities have been more or less equally shared. So I just wanted to say that at the outset before I talk about the 5 areas that I think that we have made impact. So I'll start with the ability to bring these 2 warring groups, if you like, farmers and herders, together. So in our 5-year journey, we have brought the main association of herders, Mieti Allah Cattle Association in 3 states, and the main association of farmers. And through this work that you've seen in the presentation, they have now started to work together in a way that we didn't think possible. They have, one thing that they were muting is the idea of forming a single association, because they said, after all, they're all farmers, that some are crop farmers and some are animal farmers. And they were also looking at finding a joint office and lobbying government together. So when they come together, their voices are so much stronger, and that has been a tremendous success. We've also worked with the wives of the heads of these associations, because very often women don't really get a seat at tables where decisions are made, yet a lot of the conflict they bear most of the brunt. The second thing is the early warning, early response. I think it was very important for us. A lot of people are doing early warning, but not so much early response, even though it's gaining ground in Nigeria, because it's one thing to know to flag out incidences, but if there's no local mechanisms for response, then problems continue to increase within the community. So our early response also gives them the tools which we co-develop to be able to deal with smaller problems at the community level and escalate to security services when they're not able to deal with it themselves. That really creates more harmony within the communities. The third thing that we've done is we have successfully managed to bring together practically all the entities and associations nationwide that have interest or deal with either directly or indirectly with the farmer herder issue, by having annual conferences that has now become highly respected in Nigeria. It's the go-to for farmer herder conflict in terms of information. And we always bring people from the ground to talk about their own lived experience. Fourthly, as a psychologist, I'm very, very proud of the mental health aspect of the work that we do. And I think people don't emphasize this enough. It's taken us years to convince partners, in this case, not Karuna, because they came on pretty quickly, but many other partners, of the necessity to integrate mental health in all peace building. When people are living in areas of conflict or living with conflict, it's hard to build peace unless you treat their trauma. And so it's very, very important that we treat their trauma for both perpetrators of conflict, but also victims of conflict, so that they have a space somewhere in the middle that they can meet. So the mental health program is something that has really helped with a lot of community healing beyond the dialogue. Then the fifth area actually is the area of disinformation that's already been mentioned. I think a lot of conflicts happen because of disinformation or misinformation now. And we do a lot of work in this area with the dialogues that we do, the radio programs that we also deploy. And I'll give you one such example of issue of disinformation. There was an attack on a group of herders. It was a drone attack conducted by the Nigerian military, where a lot of herders moving from one state to another were killed. I think the government mistook them for terrorists. And initially, there was a lot of misinformation, disinformation as to who was behind the attack, and tensions were really, really high. And in that instance, it was the farmers who reached out to them, who went to condole them physically, who pledged to provide them with security and support. And so there was no retaliatory attack. And that's a clear example. And we also have other examples where, unfortunately, during this work, we have sadly lost a few of the members of our team or the members of the communities that help us do this work, usually through terrorist attacks, because they're living in communities where they face constant attack. There was a young girl, Shawa, who was killed, unfortunately, who lost her life in this conflict. And what happened was quite extraordinary, because her father came up and insisted that her sister join the early warning committee, and that it was so important that this work continues. So in the 6 years that we've been doing this work, there's been a lot of changes in the community, and I think we can say without a doubt that if you make these kinds of investments at the local level, first by trying to understand from the people's point of view what their issues are, by listening to them. The reflective dialogue structure allows us to listen without judging. It actually allows us to hear them, and really to come up with programs that are reflective of their lived experiences, and also provide them with mental health support. That combination, I think, has proven to be quite instrumental in the 3 states that we do this work. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Akilu. So we want to make sure to have some time for questions and answers. I do want to just very quickly say a little bit about how we're trying to bring this home, because we obviously have a lot of challenges in our own country right now. And while I'm doing that, I encourage you to think of any questions that you have. And if you wouldn't mind, just start putting questions into the chat, and we can then call on you. But it'd be good to kind of, have a sense of what the kinds of questions are that you have, so that we can, maybe choose the ones that seem, where there's some interest from several of you. So Laura, if you want to just put up the last slide. All right, so just want to say a little bit, we are both, really trying to develop this Peace by Us model as something that we hope to be able to bring to other parts of Nigeria, to other parts of West Africa. And we're actively looking for the kind of funding support that would allow us to do that. But we also really want to adapt this model for the US. We have already been doing work locally in schools, learning a lot about what preventing violence looks like locally. And so we are now developing what we're calling a community response hub initiative. This is really a way to build community across divides, so that people in communities in our own country can begin to collaborate to address local challenges, and also to really build the civic infrastructure needed, I think, to sustain our own democracy. So we are in the process now of really developing a relationship with what we hope will be a local partner in Springfield. The idea is to have these hubs will have a partner organization where the initiative is sort of rooted in each community. And so we want to start with a local urban community that's at high risk of violence, because that is the most similar kind of context, for adapting the model for the US. And then we want to really work on refining the model so that we can, after testing it out in some urban communities in our region, begin to see, all right, let's see how we can now adapt it for under-resourced rural communities in our area in Massachusetts. And if it's successful, we're being ambitious here and trying to really think ahead, but if it's successful, we would really like to develop a training and mentoring platform so that we can begin to bring hubs to other places across the country, because we see just a huge need in the US right now. We have a crisis of isolation, we have a kind of crisis in our own democracy, and there is really a movement that's developing all across this country to do this kind of work, and we think that we have a lot of lessons to bring to it so that we can really help people come out of isolation, begin to work across our divides, to begin to solve local problems. And once you do that, you begin to see, okay, it is possible. It is possible to do that, even if it doesn't seem to be working so well at the national level. It builds faith in democracy itself. And so this is just a little bit of a picture of what we're hoping to do next in the US. So Laura, if you want to stop sharing, I would love to now turn it over to all of you to start a little conversation and to begin to look at some of the questions that you have. Let's see. Laura, do we have any questions yet? I'm just looking through the chat here.
We do. If you look just a little bit above, we have a question from Jared Miller about how elections and elite politics affect the impact we're seeing at the community level.
Okay, great. Jared, do you want to just maybe come off mute and just say your question? And we've definitely done this. We've found this work to be quite successful in preventing election violence. But let's hear from you about your question.
Thanks. Yeah, and thanks everyone for sharing your work with us. This was really interesting. My question is really thinking about kind of the intersection of bottom-up change when you're seeing really positive change, but then maybe some negative dynamics coming out from national level competition, and how you see that intersect, especially since your program spanned the pre-election, election, and post-election period, of whether you saw that some of these community level changes, whether they were able to be resilient to some of this politicization and negative political competition, or kind of the impact that you saw. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely say that in the, couple of years ago when there were national elections in the communities where we were working, there was zero election violence because the early warning, early response committees all mobilized ahead of time and really looked at the specific context there. Where were the threats of potential election violence, and really did the sort of collaborative problem solving to reach out to the groups where there was concern of participation in election violence, and were able to stop it that way. Last summer, you might remember or have read about the 10 days of protests in Nigeria, which led to many deaths. There was, a decent amount of violence. And in one of our communities, I think it was in Kaduna State, the Early Warning, Early Response Committee met ahead of time. They got something like 87 volunteers who were kind of parked on intersections all across the city, to be there as sort of monitors. And then the youth leaders began to reach out to all of the youth groups in that city and began, sort of through just conversation to get them thinking about, the consequences of what they were planning to do, and to get them thinking about, okay, if you do this, here's what might happen. And that essentially led them to kind of rethink their approach to participating in the protests. And so there was no violence in that city. Nobody died. And in fact, I believe it was the governor, I want to say, of Kaduna State that was so impressed by what happened that actually came to visit and kind of commemorate and thank, the Early Warning, Early Response Committee for that work. So I think that's a partial answer to your question. Is Ahmed still here? You might, Ahmed, if is Ahmed here, let me just see. No. Ahmed is the director of programs at Neem and might have had a little bit more to say about the kind of top-down piece. Dr. Akilu, I don't know if you have anything to say about, the kind of top-down piece of Jared's question.
Well, thank you so much. I think, yes, we've also seen it in Zamfara State, where the state government has been very interested in this model and really how to adapt and replicate it. It's kind of tied in a way to elections, but not election violence. When you do this kind of work and governments change, because we're also in a democracy, every 4 years, a government could change. So sometimes you have governments that are very, very supportive, and that could also change when a new government comes in. So those are all things that we really need to factor in our work as we go forward. But we also have a lot of collaboration with the federal government through leading agencies like the Office of Early Warning in the Vice President's Office, and also the Institute of Peace and Conflict Resolution. Because I think the whole aim is to tie this up from local, state, national level, so that a project like this really needs scale. Because Nigeria is a big country, and the conflict is geographically, it's over a wide area. So I think ideally, eventually, where we want to get to is to have the bottom tie up to the top, so that we can do scale without giving up quality.
Thank you, Dr. Akilu. And I know that Neem has been actively participating in conversations about the National Peace Plan, which may well incorporate a lot of elements of the sort of work that we're doing. And I think there's at least some hopes of that getting passed in 2026. So we'll see. But we have very much been trying to both work at the community level, but then also link what we're doing up vertically. So are there other questions? I'm not sure if I've seen another question in the chat, but is there anyone else who has a question? And I want to recognize that it's 1 o'clock. Some of you may be done with your lunch and need to go back to work. And if that's the case, we really want to thank you for coming. And if you're interested, by the way, I'll just say quickly too, that if you are interested in our Community Hub, Response Hub initiative, Laura, I think you put the link in the chat for that. But go to that page. We're actually doing a fundraising initiative right now for the pilot to start that work. So if any of you have interest in supporting that, there is a way to do that. But we will take questions and kind of continue the conversation for another 5 or 10 minutes if there's interest, even though I realize some of you may need to finish your lunch and get back to work. Are there any other questions that anyone has? And feel free you can either just come off of mute or you can press the raise hand if anyone else has a question.
I have a quick question. I would love to hear more about, please, how you use the arts as part of the psychosocial support.
That's a fantastic question. And Dr. Akilu, I will give that to you because Neem is very experienced in using sort of expressive arts as therapy as part of the psychosocial support. And we incorporated that for a bit into our work in the past 5 years. Dr. Akilu?
Thank you so much. And thank you for that question. I think we use a range of arts. The most important thing is that it has to be reflective of our culture. So, there's so many different cultures in Nigeria, cultures of that region. So we incorporate dance, music, drama, but also drawings. And we also make things like hats, fans, but each art type is chosen dependent on what's needed. So people with severe trauma, usually we use things like sewing. So they make hats, they make fans, because it's that repetitive motion is very therapeutic for people who have very high levels of trauma. And for children, we use a lot of drawings where a lot of them really can't express their trauma in words. So they use pictures, they use different forms of play to express. So it's actually adapted to the particular culture, the particular region, and what is needed in terms of severity of mental health symptoms. We assess everyone at the beginning of our programs to see what level of mental health problems they have, and then we assess them at the end to see whether or not the interventions have had impact.
Thank you. That was a really great question. Any other questions before we close out? Yeah, I just want to thank everybody who came for your time. It's really a pleasure for us to be able to share this work. We know what a difference it is making in saving lives, and sometimes, you know, places like Nigeria can seem so far away. And so we hope that this event was a way to help you feel a human connection with the people over there, and you know, for us to feel a sense of, you know, that we are in this together, that we are all you know, doing what we can in our own little ways to kind of try to bring peace to the world. So thank you all for coming. It was really a pleasure. I want to thank again our guest, Dr. Akilu. It was really so wonderful to have you here. It made such a difference, you know, for you to be able to really flesh out the context. So I will, I guess at that point, close off and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much.